Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson. As we wrap up our National Council of State Agencies for the Blind podcast, we're going to bring you a special keynote speaker that spoke at the conference during the lunch hour. And this is Paul Schroeder, Director of Public Policy and Strategic Alliances at IRA Technologies Incorporated. You all may know Paul Schroeder from American Foundation for the Blind, where for over 22 years he was in charge of programs, policies, and government relations, and much, much more. Be sure to check out all our podcasts that we delivered from the National Council of State Agencies for the Blind. We interviewed Vispero, Sprint, Patriot Industries for the Blind, Orcam, and Eschenbach. And you can find all these podcasts on the web at www.blindabilities.com. And if you want to subscribe to us in your favorite podcatcher of choice, just type in Blind Abilities. That's 2 words, Blind Abilities, where you can find over 500 episodes coming from Blind Abilities, which includes Job Insights, Tech Abilities, TVI Toolbox, iPhone 101, That Blind Tech Show, plus a lot of uncounted bonus tracks, extras. You can find it all right here on Blind Abilities. I want to thank you for listening. Grab a bite to eat. It's lunchtime. Let's hear from Paul Schroeder.
I'm excited to introduce Paul Schroeder. He is currently with IRA and formerly with the AFB, and I am not reading his long bio. He's going to tell us all about himself. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Paul.
Hey, thank you. Thank you very much. Very excited. Sorry to interrupt your lunch, but please keep eating. I want to help maybe spend a minute reminding us why we're here, which might be about data and controls, as I said before lunch. Hopefully it's a little more than that, but that's a critical part of it, I admit. I've sort of titled these remarks, Risk and Resistance. Let me first say this. I am a proud product of education from a residential school for the blind, assistance from, count them, 2 vocational rehabilitation agencies, training from a community-based organization. My career and life have been built with the help of consumer organizations, access tech developers too countless to name, university-trained teachers and professionals, and countless blind peers from whom I have learned a great deal. With that foundation, I stand here, a Braille-reading, cane-using, tech-loving, child-rearing, successful daughters, I'll tell you about them if you ask me, tax-paying, for 35 years or more, successful blind person. And I'm glad to take this opportunity to thank you and all of you who you represent for your support. I wouldn't be here enjoying this life and career rich in experience without you. All of you have contributed to this community. Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about bubble wrap. You can learn a lot from bubble wrap and the way people react to it. Really satisfying to pop, right? I mean, come on, you get those packages. I don't know, maybe you're not like me, but I, tell my wife I'm taking it down to the trash and I sneak out in the garage and I just stand there popping bubbles for a while. Sometimes one at a time, sometimes I twist it and get multiples going. Sometimes I stand on it and jump, that's kind of fun. You get the idea, right? Playing with bubble wrap. By the way, in a kind of a weird twist, the first time I ever encountered bubble wrap was a kid, and it came in the Talking Book record container. Yep, those of you who are young, records are these round things that they spin on a turntable. And so they had bubble wrap in there, and sorry, National Library Service, I spent a lot of time popping the bubbles, so it probably wasn't that useful when it got sent back. The other day, this does have a point of reminiscing about bubble wrap, which I could do. I was telling my wife that I was coming to talk to this group, and she said, "What are you going to talk about?" I said, "Well, I want to talk a little bit about risk." And she always says the same thing when I mention risk. She says, "But safely, right?" And I said, "Of course." And she reminded me that she always used to muse about wrapping our children in bubble wrap, our 2 daughters. So, of course, my parental role was to bring the challenge, the fun, and maybe a little bit of risk to parenting my daughters' lives. Now, by the way, just relevant to know this for the next part of the story, my wife is sighted. Both of our daughters have been in the emergency room and had stitches more than once. And I was never the parent on duty, by the way, when that happened. So there. A little bit of risk in life is a good thing. One of my favorite professionals in this field, he worked with me at the American Foundation for the Blind for a good while. I loved this story or quote that he would sometimes tell us. He worked with parents a lot, and one of the things that he'd always hear parents say, right, and we hear this, "I'm so afraid my blind child will get hurt And he always said, I'm so afraid they won't. Risk and challenge are so important to a life of success, I have found. And yeah, it may be good to be safe and make sure that you're not taking undue risk. But you know what? A little bit of challenge, a little bit of risk-taking is a good thing. And as I often talk to blind kids, I encourage them, sometimes outside the earshot of their professionals and parents, go ahead, take a little risk, challenge yourself a little. If you get hurt, you're going to survive. I don't usually share this part with the kids, but if you get a group of blind people together who grew up blind, and maybe some who didn't, chances are they're all going to have a story about driving a car blind. And I'm guessing most of you in this room who are blind have that story, some version of it. I remember when I had two older brothers who were sighted, and as I got to be close to 16, my dad said, I'm going to take you out, and we're going to go into a parking lot. I'm going to show you how to drive, because you should have that same experience as your brothers. And I didn't have the heart to tell them. My friends had already done it. Dad, I've been out driving. May or may not have been sober at the time, because why would you let a blind person drive if you're sober? Okay, that's probably not a good risk, and so I don't generally advise it. But you know what? That's the life we lead sometimes. You take some chances, and I've been blessed and fortunate that the injuries from my risks have been minimal, but the joy has been great. So moving on from bubble wrap, I want to talk a little bit about these sort of twin monsters that many of us who are blind grow up with and have, whether or not we lost sight as a kid or as an adult. The twin monsters of no you can't and boy are you amazing. They're both pretty bad. I grew up blind, lost my sight as a wee infant, and so not surprisingly for anybody in this room, I heard no and you can't do that a lot as a kid. And to this day, I physically recoil when somebody tells me I can't do something or don't go that way. I'm going to if you tell me not to go that way, I will do it just because you told me not to. Even if it's, going to take me off a cliff. Fortunately, that hasn't quite happened yet. But that's my visceral response to being told, no, you can't go that way. And I don't know that that's necessarily healthy, but I think it's important to resist the no, being told no, and accepting that as something we should live with. One of the things that, as you know, I work for IRA, and we'll tell a couple of stories about IRA as we talk, just because it's been relevant to my life now, and I think it does have something important to offer. It's a service that, of course, has streaming video through a camera, and our sighted agents see through the camera and can provide information about visual stuff. And talk to Anil about his story, by the way. So I was talking with our agent trainers, and they said something about agents saying no, and I said, we should probably not do that, because at least in my case, if an agent says no, I'm going to end up doing it. It's bad advice, it's not helpful, and if they're trying to provide information about something I shouldn't do, we got to find some other way, because that's going to get Paul to just do his recoil and be irascible. The other monster, of course, is the you're amazing, right? Being told no is quite harmful and destructive, but being told you're amazing for accomplishing the most routine activity or task is also destructive. All of you know this. It definitely does not help build resilience or grit. I always resisted that praise as a kid growing up, that people, and I still hate it to this day when people say, it's amazing what you people do. I have all kinds of smart alecky things, as many of us probably do, to say, and sometimes I feel like, I should really try to be nicer to people, and then I realize, I was supposed to get nicer with age, and that really hasn't happened. So maybe it still will, but I just find that frustrating. And so this whole you're amazing thing is a challenge, and it's one that I know everybody in this room works to resist, and please make sure that you do. If you're told you're amazing all the time, you're probably a millennial for one thing. And the second thing is, and I have two of them, but they don't believe they're amazing. I mean, they are amazing, but I don't tell them that. The other thing, of course, to resist that, it can also be annoying, right? Because sometimes, people do amazing things, and sometimes you should accept praise. And I've had to learn that from time to time, that, once in a while, it's actually okay to accept someone's praise. But I always did a lot of things are attributed to Winston Churchill. I don't know whether he really said them all, but one of my favorites that he apparently did say about one of his colleagues is, he's a modest man with much to be modest about. So I worry, I want to make sure I don't fall into that category. I'll say this a couple of times. All of you have been granted with the authority of a high position. And you have the expectations that come with that leadership and the responsibility that accompanies your role. And with all of that, you need to do what you can to resist those twin monsters of no and amazing. Now, I want to move to this sort of this all sort of relates together, weaves together, and this next little bit I want to talk about is resisting limits, right? And it's really all kind of tied into that being told no and you're amazing and things of that. The low expectations that sometimes our society has for people who are blind, unfortunately. And it took me a while to put my blindness into perspective for me, right? I was one of those kids who rebelled and resisted a lot of what I probably now realize, well, I do realize now, were not wise decisions on my part. I would walk around without a cane, for example, and I'm totally blind. And I'm not that good at that echo thing, whatever it's called. And so, not the smartest decision I made in my life, but that was part of my struggle against negative concepts and what I consider to be inflated recognition. But I remember being moved and changed in my philosophical outlook and helped in my understanding by the first time that I attended a National Federation of the Blind convention back in 1984 in Phoenix. Yep, that old. There it is. And I remember reading through some of the philosophy and the articles by Dr. Tenbrook and Dr. Jernigan, and I thought, here is a group this is what I've been trying to say and articulate, but also understand that, these tools that make me independent are great things to have and great things to use. And while I can resist the low expectations of society for people who are blind, I also need to endorse and accommodate the tools that will make me and allow me to be more independent and use my cane and be independent using that as a tool. And so thanks to NFB for that. It made a huge difference in my life as a young person coming out of college at that point. I later found value in working with the disability community, first in an office in Ohio for people with disabilities. Yay, Ohio. Any Ohioans in the room? Any OH? There you go. All right, thank you very much. And then with the American Council of the Blind and the American Foundation for the Blind, where I learned from my peers how to shape a world that embraces accessibility, where we live, where we work, where we play, to address those challenges and to shape an environment that was more inclusive, more welcoming, and frankly, more able to allow us to thrive and be independent as individuals with disabilities. I am so lucky to live in this time of policy progress and technology advancement. I have directly benefited from, and in some ways, tried to contribute to these policies. In my lifetime, Section 504, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, textbook accessibility, the Communications and Video Accessibility Act, to name a few, have made a huge difference to the way I've been educated, to the way I have lived, and to the enjoyment of the life that I get to pursue. Now, as I said to you earlier, I was someone who resisted services and resisted programs, not always for the best reasons, but it was part of my life, part of what shaped me to where I am today. And so I remember at age 21, when I didn't have job prospects, finally succumbing to apply for and receive SSI. And a little less than a year later, I was very proud for me when I closed it down and never went back to that service. I'm glad those programs are there, but they weren't programs that I really wanted to pursue because I felt that I could do better and that I had a different opportunity in life. And so I remember to this day, actually, Social Security had accused me or decided that I had been overpaid for various reasons. And so after a lot of debate and appeal and struggle, I wrote them a check for $2.22. And that's what we had come down to. That was my amount of my overpayment. And in the memo on that check, I wrote full and final payment for the overpayment, and they said, we can't accept that with an endorsement, so I had to write it again. I don't know how much it cost Social Security to pursue this, but it was clearly not a great use of their dollars. Part of this resistance and risk and all of that, for me, curiosity has been a really big part of my life. And I've been lucky that, for the most part, people have accepted that and even nourished it. But Goldilocks and I share a little bit of a criminal past. I kind of liked doing breaking and entering. Not into bears' houses, I guess, but as a kid, I figured out that there were ways to get into places I wasn't supposed to go. This goes back to being told no. It clearly was a problem for me. And the statute of limitations are all gone, so I can talk about it now. But I first learned that at the residential school that I attended in New York State, breaking into one of the buildings on campus that, I don't know why it was still there. It was a condemned building and they weren't using it. But it was a whole lot of fun to break into and to wander around and learn early on the skills of getting into places you weren't supposed to. And that was a moderately useful skill at different times in my life, but probably one that it's good that I've moved on from as a skill set. Although I don't know that we have enough blind criminals to honor in this world, so maybe I'm not suggesting you teach that. Well, maybe. As I said, fortunately, my parents nourished and didn't always welcome my curiosity, but they did nourish it and support it, as did my teachers. Maybe not the breaking and entering part, but the rest of it they did. My parents knew relatively little about blindness. They did, like many parents, right? They didn't come with a book of skills, particularly in the 60s. There weren't as much, it wasn't as easy to find information as, of course, it is today, thanks to a lot of work that people have done. But we were fortunate. Having been in this field a long time now, I know what happened for me was unusual and rarely happens for people who lose their sight. I had an ophthalmologist who said when my parents asked him, what do we do with this blind child? Do we keep him in the crib? And he said, no, absolutely not. If I come to the house and find out he's in the crib, I'm taking him out. You treat him like his two older sighted brothers and he'll be fine. And they did. And I was lucky for that advice that came at an important time in my parents' lives who really didn't know what they were going to be doing, and that generally speaking, that was the way they handled things, and it worked out for the most part okay. I used to envy my brothers, those older brothers that I mentioned. They seemed to have limitless access to book and news and daily goings on, and I always felt that they didn't fully appreciate how great a world they had. They were not as engaged as they should have been, but they were willing to share a lot of information with me, which I appreciated. But I really bridled at not being able to have full access to information and to all of the printed stuff that was around. I loved going to the library and hated going to the library at the same time because I knew there was all of this tantalizingly close books and things that I could read, or that should be able to read, but I couldn't, unfortunately. Well, we're getting ever closer to that day when information is at our fingertips in our technologies and fully available to those of us who are blind. And it is thanks to, again, a lot of the work of people in this room and a lot of the organizations that have made that happen. And I'm thrilled that I've been able to play the roles that I can with working on policies and now working with a company that his whole mission is to make access to visual information its core activity. And so one of the things that saddens me the most, and I hear this fairly often for people who use IRA, is a blind person who is afraid to venture forth, to go out into the world, to go do something that they wanted to do. And I'm thrilled that we're helping some conquer that barrier, and I hope we'll continue to be able to do that so that people will not only wipe away the fear to be able to move forward in the world, but will, because of that, tackle other things that have been holding them back as a successful blind person and use those other tools that are available. We must all take action to shatter those shackles that are constructed from fear. They are so ever present for those of us who are blind or visually impaired and those around us. I applaud the National Federation of the Blind for building centers of excellence in blindness skill development and for the efforts to really focus on young people and opportunities to explore and test their limits. I applaud ACB for working to ensure that the technologies that we use every day in our lives to helping to shape those technologies to be more accessible from policy and other work. As I mentioned, I am a curious person. I like to know what's around. And so one of my constant refrains when I'm out with my family was, what's over there? And some of you may have heard this before. When we would go through a mall and I would point to what's over there, it was invariably a Victoria's Secret, because they assumed rightly that I didn't want to go. So malls, as far as I could tell, were filled with Victoria's Secrets and maybe Loft. Those were the two things, and that's actually not too far from true, but I thought, there can't be that many. And so I was thrilled when I got IRA that I could in fact know what was over there and get access to those signs and information that otherwise wouldn't have been available and that my family was obviously lying to me about. So we've still got lots of battles and struggles to face. right? Education, we've got to fight to ensure that our schools can ensure Braille training, materials in accessible formats, orientation and mobility training, independent living skills, self-advocacy, go down the line. We're not there yet. Our seniors, it's heartbreaking how little our society delivers for those who lose their sight with age. For heaven's sakes, the Independent Living Services for Older Blind funding is still where we all left it in 2000 when we had a concerted effort, which I was very proud to be part of at the American Foundation for the Blind, to help raise that appropriations level. It's criminal. But perhaps nothing is more distressing than where we are with employment. The attitudes, the tech, the training, the workflow, on, things that we have not yet conquered that keep us from succeeding where we want to be with employment. And that's obviously the goal everyone in this room really is devoted to. My boss at IRA, Sumant Kanyuganti, set an ambitious goal, because tech startups do weird things like that, to take the unemployment rate from 70% down to 7%. Now, I tried to explain to him that the unemployment rate is not really 70%, but it didn't matter. It was more the alliteration, I guess, and the goal that mattered. It doesn't matter. I love the fact that he really wanted to tackle something big, to make a dent in this critical effort that has gone on for far too long as something that we have not succeeded. IRA's not going to do that alone, because it's not the only barrier. The visual information barriers are not the only barriers that we face, of course, but they are critical barriers. And I'm excited that we're going to have the opportunity to learn a lot more through IRA, and I hope you are too, about the kinds of inaccessibility that people face in the workforce, in the employment area, because we're going to know about the kinds of challenges that people are using IRA to tackle in terms of access to visual information. We're going to have insights about inaccessible software and tools and technology. We're going to learn something about training gaps and what we should focus on. And so we're not there yet in terms of how to deal with or address the data, and we don't have enough people focused on employment yet with IRA. But I'm excited about that. It's often said that you can learn more from losing or failing than you can from success, to which I say I should be really, really wise at this point in my life. Not so much. Lost a lot of battles, but learned a lot of good lessons in the process. I like to pick on my wife with this story. I came home once from yet another time where one of our issues had gotten defeated, and she said, "Don't you ever get tired of losing?" "Oh, no, you kidding? I love losing. This is like keeps me employed. I wouldn't be here." And so she's always embarrassed when I tell her that story, but the point was right. It is frustrating. It is hard. It is hard to sometimes get back up, and yet we have to do that on the grand scale when our policies don't work out. We have to do that on the micro scale when the people we're working with get hit with a loss and something that didn't work out. As I said earlier, you've been granted that authority of position, the expectation of leadership, the responsibility that comes with this role to do what you can to keep this fight alive. As I wrap up, one of the quotes that I really loved was from the 1980 convention speech that Ted Kennedy gave. As you may remember, for those of us who are old enough, he fought in the primaries to unseat the incumbent President Jimmy Carter, and he didn't succeed. But he said this: "For all of those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream will never die." And that's, I think, the note we need to take to heart. And if you want to take it down to the service level, I'll leave you with the words of Guy Clark, who got this song from his wife. "You gotta sing like you don't need the money. Love like you've never been hurt. You gotta dance like nobody's watching. It's gotta come from the heart if you want it to work." Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul.
If you're blind or have low vision,
Be My Eyes is a must-have tool.
no matter where you are,
or what language you speak.
You can call up on-demand visual support in seconds.
In seconds.
From a pool of more than 2 million volunteers.
2 million volunteers.
And the best part is,
it's completely free.
It's completely free.
No matter how many times
no matter
you use
how
it.
much you use it.
Completely free.
Besides the option to call volunteers,
you can also use Be My Eyes' new feature,
Specialized help
To get quick, high-quality
video customer service.
Directly from companies like Microsoft
and Google.
All within the Be My Eyes app.
On Android
or iOS.
Join the community
Join the community
today.
today.
On the web at www.bemyeyes.com. Enable the blind ability skill on your Amazon device just by saying Enable Blind Abilities.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap between
the limited expectations
and the reality
of blind abilities.
The realities of blind
abilities.
For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities. Download our app from the App Store, blindabilities, that's 2 words, or send us an email at info@blindabilities.com. Thanks for listening.